If you grew up in a traditional Christian home or are just intrigued by Bible history, then the story of the two brothers, Cain and Abel, who brought sacrifices to God, where one was accepted and the other forbidden, causing Cain to be angry and kill his brother, wouldn't sound new to your ears. But there are more hidden details to this story that have been left out in the Bible. First, we know that because of Cain's sin, he was marked by God and sent away to suffer for the rest of his life. But no one tells us of the other little details hidden inside the Bible texts. But of course, this video reveals all the unspoken truths about the sacrifice, betrayal, and death of Abel. First, did you know that Cain and Abel were twins like Jacob and Esau? Don't agree with me? In the normal Hebraic accounting of multiple births, the word conception and birth are not confused with each other. A perfect example of this is in Genesis 29, where it mentions that Leah conceived and bore a son, and then she conceived again and bore a son. Notice carefully here that there are two conceptions and two births, but see how that changes in the case of Cain and Abel in Genesis 4, verses 1 and 2, which reads, "Now Adam knew Eve his wife, and she conceived and bore Cain, and again she bore his brother Abel." Notice how there is just one conception, but two births. The Hebrew word for again is asaph, which means to add something. So the birth of Abel was added to the birth of Cain, which means Cain and Abel were twins, and Cain was the oldest. Now let's begin with the Hebrew meaning of the names Cain and Abel, because this is where the window to their character is revealed. And according to Hebrew tradition, one's name is a true reflection of their character. Also, the clue to the deeper meaning of this story is based on two narratives: the offering Cain gave to God and the clues given by the origin of the two brothers' names. In Hebrew, Cain is translated to Cain, which means to possess or acquire something, which explains why Eve said, "I have gotten a man from the Lord," in Genesis 4, verse 1. The name Abel also translates to Havel in Hebrew and means vanity or to be empty. In essence, Cain was a possessor, while Abel was empty and lacking substance. Of course, this is very odd because we've always thought of Cain as the wicked, evil guy and Abel as the good guy who got killed by his brother. However, this is just an oversimplification of the facts, and according to their names, Cain was a man of honor and character, and Abel a vain man. According to the Bible history and KJV translation, Cain was also a tiller of the ground, which represents a farmer and a skilled artisan. Abel, on the other hand, was a keeper of flocks, which tells us about their profession and why their offerings were different from each other. Now, this is where the story gets more interesting. Adam and Eve instructed their sons that in order to show their gratitude to God, they would need to offer a special sacrifice that would please him. So the brothers went into their fields and brought sacrifices unto God. Cain, being a farmer, bought fruits and vegetables, and Abel the shepherd boy brought sheep from his flock. But unlike Abel, who brought his best sheep and the firstborn of the flock, Cain did not see the need to offer something presentable to God. After all, the harvest was from his own sweat and hard work, so why waste it? But we are then told that God respected Abel's offerings but despised that of Cain because he did not give with a full heart and out of the abundance he had. Now, something of interest can be picked out of this story. Have you figured it out yet? Let me tell you. We often assume that God gave the first commandments on earth to Moses on Mount Sinai, but this is not true. The first commandments by God were given to Adam and Eve and their children. We see from this narrative that Abel obeyed those commandments, but Cain failed too, and this attracted God's anger upon him. Because God despised Cain's sacrifice, Cain grew angry and had envy towards his brother. He couldn't understand why God accepted his brother's offering and favored him, yet he refused his own offering. As a result, his hatred and anger grew worse towards Abel, and it caused him to commit the first murder ever recorded in the Bible. But before that happened, God gave Cain a second chance, which of course he was too angry to consider. God told Cain, "If thou dost well, shalt thou not be accepted?" Here God was trying to tell him that he could do better in the future, and if he brings the right offering, he will accept it. God went on to say, "And if thou dost not well, sin lieth at the door. In other words, if you continue in your greed and selfishness, it will cause you to sin, and these words come to pass. Cain planned his kill and was keen on making it happen. So he led his brother to the field one day and struck him to the ground, killing him. This is explained in Genesis 4 verse 8, which reads, "And Cain talked with Abel his brother, and it came to pass, when they were in the field, that Cain rose up against Abel his brother and slew him." This is a pretty straightforward text, but something is missing here, and the translators altered some parts to make it easy to read. But aren't you curious about what Cain said to his brother before leading him to his death? Actually, the Hebrew reads that first part as, "And Cain said to his brother." So what did Cain tell his brother? Unfortunately, this part was left out of the passage, and we just might never know. But anyway, Cain slays his brother and immediately realizes his actions. Still, instead of feeling guilty for his sins, he's more concerned about the punishments he'll pay for the sin committed. So to hide the evidence of his wicked deeds, Cain quickly dug a hole, buried his brother, and went about his day like nothing ever happened. Then God appeared to Cain in the field and asked of his brother Abel. This is told in Genesis 4 verse 8 and 9, which reads, "And the Lord said unto Cain, Where is Abel thy brother? And he said, I know not, am I my brother's keeper? And he said, What hast thou done? The voice of thy brother's blood crieth from the ground." Cain realized he had let envy cloud his heart, and he fell to the ground and cried. But God was not about to be lenient with Cain and punished him according to his sins. The first punishment was that his labor on the field would no longer yield crops, revealed in Genesis 4 verse 11. "And now art thou cursed from the earth, which hath opened her mouth to receive thy brother's blood from thy hand. When thou tillest the ground, it shall not henceforth yield unto thee her strength." The second punishment was banishment, where God referred to Cain as a fugitive and vagabond on earth. Still, Cain showed no remorse for his brother's death, but cried out that the punishments were too great to bear. However, the Hebrew word for punishment means avon, which means guilt or iniquity. And this reveals that Cain had great remorse for his sin, and in verse 14 he said, "Behold, thou hast driven me this day away from the ground, and from thy face I shall be hidden, and I shall be a fugitive and a wanderer on earth, and whoever finds me will slay me." But God showed him mercy and placed a mark on him, so anyone that sees him will not kill him, as seen in verse 15. It's obvious now that there's more to this murder story than the scriptures let us understand. 1. God evidently believed that Cain's sin didn't deserve death either by him or anyone else. Let's not also forget that we weren't told about the conversation between Cain and Abel before his death, so there are some elements of this story that have been removed. Nevertheless, the lesson to learn from this story of siblings' rivalry are great, and that's the most important thing to take from this video. The description of Cain's life shows us that we might be favored and destined for greatness, but the little things like anger, greed, jealousy, and envy are mighty enough to pull us into the mud. Another lesson to learn here is to have control over our emotions. Despite giving a poor offering, God still gave him a chance to right his wrongs and do better. But instead, Cain was consumed with so much anger that he failed to see the bigger picture, and of course, this led him to his doom. Well, that's all for today's video. Be sure to like and subscribe so you can be notified about our next videos. Trust me, you don't want to miss any of that.